Okay.
Oh my God. We're totally diving into a rabbit hole now.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a good place to start.
Yeah, totally.
So thank you for everybody who's checking this out. This is my good friend Joanne Croxford, and we're doing this talk for Passenger for the very first of an "If You Can See It, You Can Be It" series.
Sick. I love that.
Which is hopefully not just to talk about the work we do while being in recovery, but also to hopefully a new generation of people and trying to figure out better lifestyles in this music industry, which it seems like people are already starting to adhere to. I mean, it seems like over the last couple of years, things have changed quite a bit, but I guess it depends on who you're on tour with or who you're talking with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. It's, everyone has various degrees of well-being, right? And that's something that I've certainly learned in my journey is like, what is good for me could be completely different for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and like I've got I'm sponsoring someone who's on the road right now on their first tour, and they were told at the beginning of the tour that it was a dry tour, and this person was like, yeah, fantastic, that means I'm going to be safe on this tour, because that was one of the biggest like concerns going on the road. And like they messaged me yesterday morning saying, so unfortunately this is no longer a dry tour. And I was like, so the artist they're out with decided after the big London show, you know, the pressure cooker of being in London with all the guest list and all the, you know, all the things that, you know, performing in London brings, that they were going to like drink. And it sounds like, so the person that I'm sponsoring is nowhere near production and had to actually help with the load in because everyone just got absolutely obliterated. And like that was a tour that, you know, everyone was, well, this person, my sponsee was definitely under the impression that it was going to be a dry tour. And things changed very quickly, like overnight. And then we were just talking about, you know, it's times like these that you really like gain so much gratitude for recovery, because, you know, my sponsor was able to get up, show like local crew where things needed to go at the next gig, which was in Bristol, and like show up for work and not feel like hell. And, you know, all of the things that we know come the morning after, you know, on a bus. The walk of shame is very different when you're on a bus, as you know, or on a moving vehicle, or in a, you know, in getting into a venue and you have your head down and you make no eye contact with people, right? So we had that conversation yesterday about this was their first experience of that and what that's like. So, you know, going back to the levels of well-being, you know, it's interesting because this was going to be a dry tour, but things have changed. So I'll be interested to see, I think they've got another 3 weeks on the road. It'll be interesting to see what this now is going to become for the show.
So before, and I know we've talked about this a lot in the past because of our connection, geographic connection, but right before we jumped on here, I watched the Trent Reznor Hall of Fame speech for The Cure again.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Because for some background, Joanne and I are both from the Midwest, and and he just so beautifully describes what that's like and what certain bands meant, specifically there, obviously The Cure, because it was their Hall of Fame that he gave the introduction speech for. But he talks about how it, you know, that group made it so that he didn't feel so alone in the world. And I think for a lot of people in the Midwest, that was especially at that time, he goes through like pre-internet, of course, and you know, things were very different then, but there was just such a lack of connection that that was something he really gravitated towards. And then like through the process of that speech, he talks about how over the years they've transcended genres, and you know, they have been on the good side and the bad side of the press and everything else, and they've come out the other end transcending all that. Like where Robert Smith is just, you know, something otherworldly at this point.
Yeah, totally.
What it really struck a chord with for me was that's kind of, you know, what you're talking about is something that is really, especially in this, I mean, in all different industries, but in the music industry, it's something at first you really have to protect yourself. And like, as we're talking about somebody who made a commitment to a tour and then realized that the circumstances had changed, it reminded me of that journey where early on I had to be really protective, and then ultimately, like over time, thanks to talking with other people who have had similar experiences, I came to realize that it really is on life's terms for all the cliches that we hear in these programs, that ultimately like it's up to the choices we're making and what's going on up here. And but that's not easy at first, because I mean, we're not only surrounded by it in this industry, we're encouraged.
100%. And often, depending on whereabouts you sit within the industry, often you are given that as your payment for showing up.
Right.
You know, we can't afford to pay you, but we're going to give you like an amazing rider. Fantastic. You're going to have all the Jack Daniels you could ever use. But we can't afford to give you cash. And you and I both know that you like, you know, no amount of cocaine will pay your rent. Right. That is a fact. Like, that is a fact. But that is like, especially like in the UK, you know, and touring around the UK is something that I love, going to Europe and coming to North America because it's so different. But again, like bands who are kind of breaking in, they are still like given, you know, cans of Stella instead of given food, you know, whereas in Europe, a lot of like the tradition around is like, okay, after sound check, we all sit and we stop and we eat together and you have a hot meal with your crew and everyone sits down. Whereas like in the UK, it's like, it's just very different. So it's like, you know, and that also comes into it. It's like we design these beautiful kind of ecosystems when we're on the road of people that we know and trust and love. But it can go very, very wrong.
That's a very different dynamic too. I mean, in Europe, like they value the product, which is the entertainment, and the people involved in it. And there's a meal included, and then you get to the UK or the States and it's circus peanuts. Yeah,
and that's how, but you're made to feel like that as well. Like it's so different, and it's just astounding. It's astounding, and it still shocks me even now after all these years. I'm still just like, you know, but it goes back to what level of shit are you willing to withhold and withstand in order to pursue your dreams? Because this is not an easy place to come into and to remain either, you know, but it can be done. And that's why things like Passenger are so important, and all these networks that, you know, if COVID was good for anything, it brought us all together to be able to have a foundation of collective knowledge to be able to point people towards, you know, and that's super important.
Yeah. I mean, some quick background. I mean, we had met through music support in the UK. I was over there playing. And Sarah Newton, who's the promoter, put us in touch, and that was 3 months before the pandemic. And we started doing transatlantic meetings between music support and Passenger.
Yes, we did.
And that's how we became friends. And that alone was a fascinating experiment, because you have an NA background, I have an AA background, but we had people from Al-Anon, and we had people who were from, you know, all recovery, just people from every different corner, because that's what life is like, and that's what our industry is like. Is people are coming from different backgrounds and different struggles to ultimately find shared experience, and so it was fascinating.
Yeah, totally. And I think there was so much richness that was brought into those rooms as a result of people coming from all those different places. And that's what I love about our business as well. Is like one of my favorite things about touring is you meet so many different people and you see so many different things and gain so much different perspective. And, you know, and I definitely know that for a fact, our coming together and the way that we did as friends, it changed my recovery. Like it enriched it in a way that I didn't even realize needed to be enriched. And being exposed more to AA was through you, was like, it's changed my life. It's opened my eyes in a different way. You know, I'd had previous experience with AA that was, it had made me more committed to NA just because of the words that I'd heard in certain rooms. But as a result of spending time with you and other people who are in different fellowships, I've managed to realize that, okay, so the words we use may be slightly different, but the language is all the same. It's about looking after yourself, taking responsibility, being accountable, and loving yourself and other people, ultimately. You know,
I remember going into one of my first AA meetings, and I heard meeting makers make it. It was like, I don't know what any of that means, but it's redundant, and I don't care about it.
Yeah, exactly. This has nothing to do with me, because it's all about me. So, and that's not serving me. So whatever.
Right. So I just used it over and over again to talk myself out of the rooms. It took me so long to realize, like, regardless, you know, I've learned so much from NA through you. I've learned so much from AA, and there have been times when my own resistance, and this goes back to what we were talking about with, like, ultimately the battle is in our mind, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Circumstances and the outward environment, that I can talk myself out of just about anything. And it's up to me whether I'm willing to take what works from a meeting or whether I'm willing to point a finger and walk out the door because I'm only hurting myself.
Absolutely. And when you're making your, I really love, overheard somebody share something recently that was, I can't remember what, basically saying, if you want to be right, I'm sure that there's a saying, isn't there, Chris, that's like, do you want to be right, or do you want to be
at peace?
Like, at peace. That's it. And I just,
I want to be free. Yeah.
And I love that because it's like, you're just fighting against it all the time. But like, if you just like stand back and say, do you know what? I actually don't know everything. I don't know everything. That was my biggest admission when I first came into recovery. Is like, I don't know everything. Thank fuck I know that now. And I find so much power in that, being like, I don't know everything. And it opens my mind and my eyes to teachability, and that's like one of our spiritual principles of all of our fellowships. It's like open-mindedness, teachability. I love that there's a saying, I've heard in AA, certainly, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. I love these bumper stickers. Like, they exist for a reason, right?
Yeah, so many chestnuts.
yeah, totally. Basically, shut the fuck up and listen. Like, I remember, so the person that 12-stepped me, my old boss, he said to me, you might want to do yourself a favor for the first time in your life and listen with your ears rather than your mouth. And I was so affronted by that. I was like, well, fuck you, but thank God. But I listened to him. He was the only person in my life to that very point that I'd actually respected enough to be like, do you know what? I'm going to give that a go. And I think that's probably saved my life time and time again.
Yeah. And I will never forget the first time I heard you say, carry the message, not the addict, because that's something on the kind of on the flip side of it, where if we're open to something and then we start taking action and a program is working for us, and then we get involved, and then we get into service work, and then we start sponsoring people, and then we start attaching ourselves to that position, and and then there's either empathy fatigue, or we're worrying about things that are none of our business, you know what I mean? And that really struck a chord with me. It pops into my head multiple times a week, because anything beyond helping our fellow person is self-righteous or deifying ourselves, right?
100%. And I think we as addicts just have that naturally running through our veins, like, we will let me take over, let me control your circumstance, let me do that. It's like, no, I can show you what I'm doing, and if that is something that makes you feel like you're empowered to do what you need to do and to look after yourself, great. But that is like the limit of how I can help you in this situation. Because when I start thinking I'm driving this is when like shit really does hit the fan. Like, I really can carry the message, but I can't carry the addict. I had a friend who's just started sponsoring reach out to me last week, and he was like, oh, dude, my sponsee's relapsed, and he's going in, I was sure for like a whole week that he wasn't telling me he'd relapsed. He's relapsed, and now he's going back into rehab, but I'm just so stressed. And I was like, it sounds like they're in the right place where they need to be. Like, it's actually like not your responsibility. You can stand by and support their journey. But when you get into a place of trying to control, you're actually not helping. And then it starts slipping into other areas, like, maybe you could go to a CODA meeting or go to Al-Anon or all these other places where you very clearly begin to realize where you end and that person begins. And that's super important in recovery. Like, that's one of the biggest lessons that I think I've learned, and I continue to learn, especially as I've now got 6 sponsees, which is like, I can't believe that. Like, what the fuck? I wasn't even like trusted with my parents' house keys for years. Do you know what I mean? And now people are like calling me, like, and I just think like, wow, and I've taken on this responsibility because I care about myself and I care about other people. But I know that ultimately I can offer suggestions, but it's up to that person whether they decide to take them.
And you really tapped on something with just the idea of control, because I think for a long time at the end, for me, when I was checked out completely, I had no semblance of control over anything. And so it was a lot of posturing and a lot of shell games. And then when we get into a program where things start to actually work, we go the other way with it, so it's all about like recognizing behaviors and looking for balance in the middle. But I mean, we're so used to highs and lows that definitely translates into the way we behave in early recovery and beyond, for sure.
Totally. And I think that really is a great segue to talk about touring life and the highs and the lows, and it's I had it last year, and I get it every time. I mean, I went and did a private gig this weekend. I was only away for 2 days, and I've come back and I still feel a bit shell shocked, It's still a bit like, okay, so where does my toothbrush go? What do I usually do on Mondays? Like, how do I get back into some kind of routine? And I mean, recovery for me is my bedrock. So I get straight back into service work. I reached out to my sponsees. I've made plans to talk to my sponsor this week. Like, that is what I know for me I need to do in order to feel like I'm coming back into the world. But I certainly felt like after being on tour for I think I was out for like 9.5 weeks last year, coming home, I just genuinely didn't know what the fuck was going on. I didn't know my shoe size. I was just a bit like, ugh. And thankfully, you all held me and were like, you're going to be okay. But, if you don't have a program of recovery to bring you back down to earth after that, living in the way in which you live when you're on tour is like, you're living in a heightened state of cortisol all the time, heightened state of, things are happening, stimulation, shows, and all of the things that are involved. And there's not a lot of self-soothing happening in there, unless you're able to build that into your touring, your touring routine, which is fantastic. You come home and you are like a shell of a person. And, I wouldn't be surprised. And interestingly enough, I was thinking about this yesterday when I was working at music support. A lot of people who used to call the helpline, it was when they came home. When it was, I very rarely heard from people when they were on the road. I did occasionally, but it was, I'm home now and I don't like my family anymore. And I'd rather be on tour. I'm home now and I don't know what day my garbage goes out. And I don't, I mean, I had people calling me crying because they couldn't remember their PIN code for the ATM because they'd been on tour for so long. But obviously that was the needle that broke the camel's back. There's obviously a lot more going on, we spoke in this specific incident. It's just turned out that this person had been so overwhelmed by work for the whole year that they got home, and that was the thing that broke them. I think we get into a state in touring where we're just a heightened sense of ourselves. And that's the area where I'm really interested in working with artists specifically who are in recovery and touring with them, because it's, understanding what's necessary for the environment and also for the energy and the vibe when you're on the road.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about extreme highs and lows. And I've heard you and Susie in the back lounge talk about, like, one of the first times I jumped in there was a lot of talk around that decompression after the tour.
Totally.
And that was another real gift for me with the pandemic is we talk about the pandemic a lot, I think, because we spent so much time together.
Oh my God, which was literally hours. Yeah, absolutely.
But it really, I mean, that brings a good point, because, I think because of what I did and who I either was or thought I was at the time, even as a person who was in recovery, when the wheels stopped, and so it was like that decompression period went from, okay, but I know there's going to be another tour. And so there's not this downtime. It's, okay, sit in front of this mirror for a couple of years. And so everybody, I mean, as somebody who is just on the run a lot, I had to sit down and really look at things that I wasn't even aware that I was running from at home.
Yeah.
And be that my relationship or my family or our, the way our household is structured, or any of the things that I've been lucky enough to even experience in recovery. It was like, I think as somebody who was on tour a lot, it was like, oh, okay, well, this is my part in this, but then I get to bounce out every couple months. And so I come back to it, as opposed to, this is it right now, and it was a really interesting experience. I mean, it was really good ultimately, but I think it was the same thing. To me, it felt like a long-term compression or decompression.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting as someone watching you go through that, because obviously I experienced that through a screen, and I saw you going through these stages of, it's almost like when you come into recovery, you're like, we often say it's like you're frozen and then you start like defrosting, right? Or like the onions layers start being peeled off. And, as we spent more time in meetings together over that time, like hearing you change almost completely and talk about things in a totally different way, or even rediscovering things about all the things you've just described, because you'd not been able to really like dive in, but because you were going away, you were tapping out all the time. So it's like, it was so interesting as someone else in recovery to see how you were applying your spiritual program to navigate that stuff, because it's fucking big stuff. And that's why a lot of people go on tour, because they cannot handle that, and I was talking to a production manager that I know this weekend, and we were saying, to really be able to withstand what we do when we're on the road, and really like, look at the like intense touring schedules and like the constant interaction with people. It's like, you have to really have your shit together to be able to do it in a quote healthy way. Otherwise, the wheels, when they come off, they fucking come off in a big way. So it's like, you know, you were able to really engage with that stuff. But I really genuinely believe that the space for that is off the road. Like I don't know how I would personally be able to tour in really early recovery. And I know you have, and I'd love to hear you talk about that, because it's something that I know your sponsor was really like vital for you and your routine when you first came into recovery.
Even after treatment and all the things that kind of redirected me a little bit, without what you're talking about in early recovery, like somebody telling me, like people who had made it work beforehand. When my first sponsor was an engineer, he didn't care about music, he didn't care about who I thought I was or any of that. But he did care about me checking in after sound check, because he was like, you're not staying in that space, you're too early in this, check out, go get coffee, structure your day. And so that little thing, and then, you know, reading things like the Book of Joy and calling other people in the program, and all these little things, again, that I couldn't really see, that if I'm honest, in my head early on, it was like, oh, none of this shit's really gonna matter. But
exactly. What the fuck am I doing? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't see it at the time, but the little things added up to a structure that benefited me greatly, that I couldn't even see until a few years later. It was like, oh God, that's how I stayed. Yeah. You know, by listening to people who knew what they were talking about and who had made that change, you know. And so while my ego was going, this shit doesn't matter, luckily I was actually, you know, I had enough wherewithal, thanks to the program, to keep in touch with people and do the things that I couldn't see were going to help me long term at the time.
Yeah. Which is amazing. And I think, and that's one of the biggest sources of power that I get, is the connection with other people in the rooms. Like that's what, you know, we all say in all of our fellowships, we can't recover alone. I can't, but we can. And that's absolutely true. You know, the steps in the way that they're written, it says it's a we program for a reason. You know, addiction in any form, it is the most cunning enemy of life, in that it wants you to be on your own and isolated. You know, so even if you can just call people, that I remember in the first like even few years where it just felt so weird to call people just to talk to them. I'd be like, because I was so stuck in a place where every relationship needs to be transactional. I have to get something, I have to be able to manipulate to be able to get something out of this in order for me to even put time in. Otherwise, I'm just not even going to waste my time. You know, to actively just call someone and say like, how are you? Or like get so out of myself by becoming interested in other people. You know, and now I lean on that so heavily. You know, my sponsor friendship and family is so important. You know, you're a part of my inner circle as well. Like regular connection, so important. But in the beginning, I was like, who the fuck are these people? Why the fuck do they care? And it's because that when all that stuff goes away, like when all of a sudden the laminate around your neck doesn't give you all access everywhere, when all of a sudden, you know, all these things that we rely on in our industry to give us gravitas are taken away, those people are still there making coffee in church halls with really bad fucking strip lighting every week because they love you. You know, and that for me, like I needed that permission. I didn't have my whole life. I never had that kind of like love, unconditional love.
Right.
And people like I pick up the phone to and be like, you know, okay, so I'm out on tour with X, Y, and Z. And, you know, some people would be like really like, oh, wow. You know, outside of the program would be like, wow, that must be so glamorous. But having the permission to call someone saying, I'm having a really fucking hard time, and them say, dude, I totally get it. Let's go to a meeting online together. Let's do a reading together. Or, you know, this is what helped me today. Or just to hear about something that wasn't related to the road was it's still so important to me. Like, otherwise I just get so sucked in. And that's also like a real danger in our business, is like, and we've talked about this a lot. It becomes who we are. You know, we are defined by being a keyboardist in a band, being a tour manager, you know, being with a band and being with this thing that, you know, carries so much power in the world, that we get swept away with it. Addicts are so, I think we as addicts just are aligned with that anyway, because it's so, you know, massive ego, low self-worth, right? And it's like, it just encourages that. So it's like having people to be able to help you put the brakes on is really, really important. Like
about 6 months ago, a guy called me out of the blue. I didn't even have his number in my phone. And he was like, hey, he was like, hey, is this Chris? I'm like, yeah. And we got about 5 minutes into the conversation before he realized he'd called the wrong Chris. But he was another program guy who just picked my number off a pack at a meeting. And he was like, oh, okay, I guess I got the wrong guy. And then we talked for a half hour anyways, because it didn't have anything to do with who we were. It had to do with what we had in common, and that was really, it was funny because it took us that long to even figure out, oh, he's not talking to the right guy. But none of that mattered, because it was about the connection that we have through the program, not anything else, and the ability to just talk to a complete stranger is, I mean, those are pretty crazy lifelines, because like you said, we really value our time. And as somebody who was using, you're right, I was looking at the clock going, how is this person going to benefit me or not benefit me? Because if not, I gotta go.
I got other things
somebody
to do.
Who doesn't even know who they're talking to on the phone.
Yeah. And this is what I love. It's like, you can go anywhere in the world and find a meeting and sit down and talk to anyone. And that's what we do. Like, we welcome people in. And that's, again, that for me, having that permission, that like totally like blank canvas to go in and just be and connect with people. That is what I was looking for all those years when I was taking drugs. I was so desperate for communication and community and connection, and I just was looking at it in all the wrong places. Like, absolutely, like looking for love in all the wrong places was like totally like a country song I could totally relate to. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was totally my life, and that's why bands like The Cure was so important and still remain to be so important. Joy Division, we talk about Joy Division a lot, and Nirvana, and like all the Riot Grrrl bands that like literally saved my life when I was a kid. I was really heavily bullied when I was younger, and they told me, do you know what? Don't listen to those assholes. There's better out there for you. And they're the reason why I wanted to work in music, because I was like, I want to be close to that in whatever way I can. And that's how I got to where I am today. And thank God, through, on my journey, I met someone, my old boss, who showed me that you can be in recovery in this industry. I remember when I first met him. So I started working at a management company called IE Music, and I started, it's still my favorite job till today, working as their receptionist. So I was able to meet, people from promoters to tour managers to PR people to everyone you can think of would come in that office. And I also saw, so David, who 12-stepped me, David E, he would have like, because I would always get in early in the morning, and I'd make juices for us because I love making juice. And he would have early morning conversations with these random people would just come in. And like over time, I would realize those were his sponsees, and he was sponsoring people, even though he had like this big job where he was like, managing some of the world's biggest pop stars. And he had that was what he'd been doing for like the last 30 years. He was still giving his time every morning to these people who I was like, what the fuck is this guy giving his time for to these people? So he was already showing me like a design for life, a design to make things different. Great Manic Street Preachers, like reference. An ideal for living. Like, yeah, exactly. And that's it. Like, totally. Like, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And seeing how he was giving his love to people. I mean, he gave his love to me when he showed me, the door to Narcotics Anonymous. And at his funeral, somebody said from his family, one of his daughters, who you and I both know, Belinda, she said, my dad always said that the biggest gift you can give people is your time. And that's just like blew my mind. I was like, fuck, this is it. This is actually love. Love equals time, giving yourself selflessly to other people, and David would, every Wednesday, he would go off, he would leave work early, and I never really understood why. I was like, what? And it actually turns out that he used to chair a meeting in the local prison at Wormwood Scrubs every Wednesday. He chaired an NA meeting. And somebody said in the room, gosh, a few years ago, so they were sharing about him, and they said, David E, he was like somebody said to him, oh, why do you do this? You like manage like the world's biggest pop stars, and like, but you do this meeting on Wednesdays at Wormwood Scrubs. And he said, it's because I do this meeting at Wormwood Scrubs that I can do all that other stuff, and I was just like, that's what service was to him. And like, I saw that from a very early stage, like early days before I was even in recovery. And that's what I try and model and bring to my sponsees and try and bring to the world, is like, if you give yourself selflessly to people, you get so much fucking out of it. Like, I saw that guy, like, totally. And that's what he was just like a master of. And I'm just so grateful to my higher power that I was working in that office. Actually, that was like school every day, seeing how he was doing it and how he was practicing his principles in all his affairs. And, the people that I met as a result of people coming through the door and seeing people in recovery, who we would have parties and none of them would drink. And I'd be like, what the fuck, free, like the most expensive champagne in the world. There's drugs, and they're just not even touching it. They're just like, are fucking levitated towards everyone with like their grape juice. Do you know what I mean? I was like, what is going on here? But it was like, that was what recovery looked like. And from a young age in the industry, I was able to be in an environment where David was very open about his recovery. He would help anyone. They paid, my old bosses paid for me to go to therapy for many years. I couldn't afford it, and they paid for me to go to therapy. That was before I came into recovery. And then as a result of that trust that was built up, when I hit my rock bottom when I was living in Berlin, my mum flew me home to speak to David in person. And he took his time out of his day to sit with me and say, there's always been somewhere, you've always been welcome, but in recovery, we don't push people through the door. You need to find your own way, and that's, get yourself to a meeting, sit down and listen. And that was the Friday. And then by the Tuesday, I'd actually gone along to my first English speaking meeting, because I was living in Berlin, of Narcotics Anonymous. And that was on February the 27th. That was 13 years ago. So, and I haven't, that's been my life since. Relapse is not part of my story. And I don't judge people when it is, but it's just my story does not include relapse. I haven't touched drugs or drink since that time, but that doesn't mean I haven't acted out in other ways, of course, because that's what addiction is, like fucking whack-a-mole. But like my commitment to recovery in this industry is because of him being able to see that it is possible to be in recovery and thrive in this business.
And what you said about service work with him doing a meeting in the prisons every week, and not to call you out on this, but I want to ask you about the neighbor who you've mentioned and some of the things that you do. Like, is it going to get the mail from the neighbor, or dropping off plants or flowers or something?
All sorts of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you said that many years ago. We were in a meeting and you mentioned that you're like, I do, every morning I go out and do some things for my elderly neighbor. And
yeah,
I don't even know if she knows that I'm doing it, but I do it because I know it needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still do that. I think that for me is like the opportunity to really like deposit something into my spiritual bank account, doing something when there's no one watching, like committing a random act of kindness for anyone, anytime, and not expecting a fucking parade about it. Do you know what I mean? Because before I was in recovery, I was like, I would want the fucking press to know. Do you know what I mean? I would want front page, or I wouldn't even bother. But now I, quietly, of humble service to things and to people around me and to my environment and to my community, even if it's just rubbish picking in my local park, but not like making a big song and dance about it. You don't have to. I think service can come in so many ways. And I still do things for people that they don't even realize I do, because it's makes me feel fucking amazing, actually.
Right. And I think that is who are you when the lights go up, is what is a big part of the program for me. And the ability to do those things without some kind of expectation is something that I never thought. Everything came with either I'm getting a reward for this, or I'm going to hold it against you.
Yeah. And you'll never live it down, because I'll hold a resentment for fucking ever, basically. Because it's just like that was absolutely my currency for years as well, like resentments. It's like, how can I hold on to them until I realized that they were making me really sick? That was what was making me super sick. And I was acting out and doing all the things that I was doing because I was really resentful about all the things that had been done to me, because obviously I had no responsibility for anything that I'd done. It was all about, my parents had wronged me. You just think, oh my God, like, now that I think about it, I just think, I understand why I felt that way. And, I was resentful towards all the bullies that bullied me at school for so many years. And I internalized that fucking anger. But now I turn that shit around and I help people. And that's why I do all the work that I do in the LGBT community and, working with people of color. And I think it's so important, because I've felt othered so many times in my life. So rather than being resentful and angry, I turn that, like the Public Image Limited song, like, anger is an energy, right? I mean, like anger is love. Like, turn that anger into love and fucking do something great with it. Because that's what recovery does. It gives you permission to do that.
Yeah. I love these references, by the way. These are all right in my wheelhouse.
Well, I mean, absolutely, it makes sense. We are music industry people. It's so great to be able to talk to someone else that gets my references, because sometimes people are just like, you just go straight over the head, and you're like, okay, we don't listen to the same music, evidently. Okay.
So you worked with Girls Rock London quite a bit as well. I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about what you would say to a young person getting into the music industry today, because you came from London, Ontario, ended up in Reading, England.
Yeah, that's right.
And then Berlin, and then to London, England, correct?
Yeah. So I went so Canada, London, Canada, Reading, London, Berlin, back to London, Cambridge, London. I think my biggest piece of advice for people coming in, this is such a good question because I get asked a lot when I sit on panels, and certainly the work that we do at Girls Rock London, which is a part of a global Girls Rock Camp Alliance, helping people to find their voice through music, is find your people early. Find your people that are really like cheerlead, that you're willing to cheerlead and that cheerlead you, because you need them. You need them. You need community. Like, it's the music industry is very much like, it's very cutthroat. It's very nepotistic. It's, you know, nepotism is the way in which you get anything done in this business. It's who you know. And if you make an impression on people and approach things with kindness in your heart and genuinely give, you will stick out from the crowd. But likewise, what I would also say is learn how to look after yourself and protect yourself, because it is a very rocky ride. You know, the way that things are structured in the music industry, it's been one way for so long. And there are some of us who are in this business trying to do things differently. And it's more challenging because we are challenging the status quo. You know, like for me as a queer person in recovery, you know, I navigate the space very differently. My life is very different from, like, you know, some white road dog dude who's been doing it for 70 years, who, you know, sees me as a threat because I'm doing things differently, because I'm, you know, bringing my own experience into the space. And I think if you're not ready to see that there are going to be people with different opinions and different lifestyles that you're going to experience, and you're not comfortable and confident within yourself, that will chip away at you. That is a fact. So that's why we do what we do in Girls Rock London, and certainly in 3T, the other charity that I volunteer for, is, you know, giving people the confidence in the community to be able to navigate whatever's ahead of them. Because it's all great and well that we're helping all these young people to get in and do all these things, but if they get into an environment and they're not met with the same love and cheerleading that we're providing for them on their journey, then that we're setting them up to fail, basically. And I will not have that. I will not put my name to something that's setting people up to fail. So we help build a community so that they can go out, and whatever they experience, we help to make the environment, like, understand that there's going to be new people in spaces who, you know, maybe are trans or maybe come from a different social economic background to you, and how to make sure that people feel safe in that space so that you can thrive at work. Because, like, when you are in a business and when you're on a tour, when you're in a studio, when you're doing all these things with people that you get on with, this is the fucking best industry to work in. It's so fantastic. When things go well, it's so wonderful. And it's just about finding those spaces and not being disheartened if you don't find them at first, because you might not. And in the real world, you would, you know, it takes time. You have to, you know, try a few things out before you're going to find, like, your groove. And that's all a part of the process as well.
It's interesting because I mean, we talk about how music and recovery kind of go hand in hand you know, they bring the same kind of connection, whether you're a concert goer or somebody, a crew member or a musician or whatever. There is a connection that brings everybody together, a lot like recovery, and that we do all come from different corners and different experiences. But it's funny because there is an old guard in both of those worlds.
Totally. Gatekeepers. Yeah.
And it works the same way a lot of time, where sometimes on either side, sometimes people have the best interest at heart. Sometimes people are having a bad day, or they feel threatened or whatever.
Yes.
And they just want to shut you down. And it took me a long time to see that myself, but that the more it becomes a melting pot, the bigger benefit everybody receives. And there are just some people, there's just some people that won't see that, you know what I mean? And
they're holding on.
Yeah, and a perfect example of that, excuse me, is to give a shout out to the Boiler Room in Guildford, when they were talking about how they raise people up in that space, and they teach them how to do sound, and they you know. And I was, you know, we were working with the tour manager at the time, who was absolutely threatened by everything he saw going on when they were giving us a tour of the place. And it was just like, I don't know, it was kind of watching that in real time, I guess, because of who I am, which is a middle-aged white guy, and seeing those two very clear difference in circumstances and kind of an old guard being faced with the future was kind of fascinating to me. It was like, God, I never really saw it in that kind of black and white, but it's 100% fear-based. 100%.
And that's it. And these people will do anything and wield whatever quote power they've got in order to make sure that does not happen, that change that they're so afraid of doesn't come to fruition. You know, and it's and I've seen it, and again, it's something that I used to pick up the phone to at music support all the time. Unfortunately, someone being bullied on the road because they bring new ideas, or they symbolize change, or they're queer, or all these things that make them quote othered. Again, it goes back to being othered. And that can be an incredibly challenging environment to be in if you feel so isolated, and you are an addict and you've got issues with substance misuse, because that's going to make you go into your shell even more. And that for me is like something, when we talk about diversity in the industry, I really genuinely want to bring voice to those of us in recovery who are in the industry, because we're also a minority. We are also, okay, so it may not be, it's not based on our race, it's not based on our sexual identity or or any other thing, but we are different from the general like people that you find in the business. We are, that's a fact, and that's why I'm always so excited when I meet other people in recovery on the road. I'm like, fuck yes, you're sober, like this is amazing, like we need to be friends and connect. And but it's you are still met with people that are threatened. It's fear, and you can see them, because they fear that you're going to take what who they are away. You're taking that thing away that makes them who they are. What we've talked about before is like, this business can define you, and you become that character, and you are seen as a guiding light who's trying to change things, and that scares the shit out of people. You're rocking the boat. So I have heard of instances where people have been like taken off of tours, or like left behind on tour buses, or all the most hideous things that, if you don't have a community of cheerleaders behind you supporting you, can really fuck you up. Like, and I see it all the time. I mentor young people as well in the industry that, and through the work with 3T, we're helping ethnic and gender minorities to get jobs in a tech space on tours. I've actually seen white people who were obviously very threatened by the fact that there was a Black woman on their crew. It's very clear. I've heard some very horrific manifestations of white supremacy in those spaces, and trying to help people to get out of those situations, who are, new in the industry, trying really hard to find their identity in the industry and doing a job that they fucking love, but actually they just can't be there because the environment isn't inviting, and it isn't supporting them as an individual. It's really like, it's so disheartening, because as you say, we really are so much better off when there's so many different kinds of people represented in our spaces. Like it brings so much beauty, but it's because people are threatened that they're trying to stop it. And that's, I think that's, that's like the biggest thing.
What people who are already othered, and when that happens, it absolutely confirms, every fear or insecurity or whatever, or any kind of interest in working in that industry, or trying to remain in recovery on the road. I mean, that ties in as well. There's
totally
kind of a stigma that transcends those things. But they're definitely two different things. But it's definitely, it makes you wonder how many people that we've how much talent we've missed out on in this industry because of things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm really keen. I've been thinking about it recently. I really want to align myself more with working with artists who are sober. Like I've talked about it for a long time, but I really want to do that. Being on tour recently with Duran Duran, obviously John Taylor's very vocal about being in recovery, and we shared a lot of, experiences together on the road. And I thought, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do, creating an environment where, whether it be a crew member or whether it be an artist, but specifically for me, working the tour management team is like creating an environment where that person can thrive and not have to worry about being surrounded by booze, or, just quietly getting them off in a car when everyone else is partying, but knowing that that's what they would need in order to be able to do this job. That's what I've certainly gained from 13 years of being in recovery. It's like, you have an understanding and you can talk to someone, have an honest conversation about, okay, so what feels good and what doesn't, and that's the beauty of practicing a spiritual program, whatever that looks like for you. Part of that is being able to find the words for what you need, and being able to have honest conversations with people and say, okay, so how do you want to manage this situation that's coming up for us tomorrow? Or, what will be helpful for you? Or, and looking at it from a holistic point of view, as someone who's trying to navigate what is a really grueling space when you just don't drink and don't take drugs. I don't think people realize who are using those things, how like how relentless it is to be around it all the time. Like it's, you know, when riders have, you know, when you look at riders and they're like, you know, at least 5 pages of booze, and you're like, well, let's just look at that. But, you know, let's look at the touring budget and see what else could we be doing with the money that we're asking people to put into our dressing rooms. Why don't we get a masseur in for the day for everyone? Why don't we get like someone to come in and cut the crew's hair? You know, there's so many other things that you could be doing, or like, just let's not put money towards that. And I know a production manager friend of mine who, and he won't mind me sharing this, was on tour with Nile Rodgers, and they had so Nile is also in recovery, very open about it. And he wanted to have a totally dry tour. And this production manager said they saved thousands and thousands of dollars on the bus from booze. And that was just booze for the bus. You know, he said we saved thousands. So what we did with that money that we saved is we gave it to charity. And I just thought if there was, you know, in an industry where numbers are important to a lot of people and budgets certainly now are being crunched, surely this is a time when we can really be looking at that and saying, okay, so if we do want to not, you know, if we do want to look at our spending, let's look honestly about where we can save money. Let's not buy booze for everyone. You know, it's everyone's, it's everyone's business what they do on their days off. Absolutely. But we are not going to, you are not going to find this in dressing rooms, and you're not going to find it on the bus anymore. That's actually just a fact.
And as somebody who was on the other side of that for many years, I mean, I remember all the stacks of Carling that were just left behind that we paid for anyways. We didn't even have room for it.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a waste. Everything was such a waste. And so even people who can drink like human beings, supposed to have got
as in not us.
Right. Right. I mean, we didn't, you know, there was so much waste that they wouldn't want that to be spent anyways, because they're consuming a beer or two a night. You know, and so the people who aren't drinking and the people who are drinking, who are just kind of having an icebreaker or whatever, you know, I mean, nobody wants to spend that much money, but I think it's inherent as part of that. You have to have a rider and you have to be spending this so much money. It's kind of like a friend of mine who was part of a band there from Liverpool came over here several years ago and was on a tour bus. And they were playing like 300 cap gigs, and it was just crazy. Like he was saying, well, we're not going to make anything off of this because we're wasting all our money on this tour bus that the record company said that we have to have, because that's just how it works. And so rather than doing things a little more efficiently, which is what we're talking about, it was just money down the drain, kind of like endless stacks of crates of beer.
Oh, but it's like, you know what it is, Chris? It's like, well, we've always done it that way.
Right.
And then and goes back to those gatekeepers who are like, well, we've always done it like this. Not, do you know what? Let's be, you know, the term that was so like commonly used in lockdown and in during COVID times, certainly, was like, how can we pivot and make things different? Let's actually look at it. Let's actually look at the numbers and be like, if we didn't buy fucking booze every night, what could we be doing with that money? You know, how can we travel in a different way as a result of us not, you know, feeding people beers that they're not even going to take? It's just like there's so much waste that happens in our industry naturally, unfortunately, because we are essentially moving towns every time, aren't we? Like we as entities are like moving, regardless, you know, depending on how big your team is, you are like a moving entity. You're like a moving, whether it's a family or a village or someone like Ed Sheeran, where you're moving a fucking town every day or every few days. How can we look at ways to really challenge the norm and actually make people a lot happier? Let's buy smoothies instead of fucking beer, you know, and then people will perform better. People will be happier. Like, you know, Susie Green talks about it all the time. She's such a champion for like healthy touring. Let's like actually feed people better. Let's put that money into catering and the catering budget instead of, you know, buying Jack Daniels at every single gig that it just goes in a flight case somewhere. You know, there are so many other ways to do it, but it's like, it's being willing to look at previous behaviors and want to change them. And that actually is what we do in recovery, isn't it? It's like, how can we change the wires that we've wired in for so many years and done it this a certain way? How can we change this and actually make our life different and always better?
Yeah, I mean, I got to a point, I mean, being in the music industry and being able to tour and perform, and that's something I wanted to do from the time I was like 5 years old. And it actually got to a point before and after sobriety, because of perspective, because of what we're talking about, where it became like just unbearable. And I realized, especially, you know, it's just amazing to me that's where it got. And sure, the drugs and the alcohol contributed to that. There's no question, because I was in a black hole and it was like, okay, this is how I'm going to make my money. And that's just it. And I had no desire to change or consider a better way of life, or at the until things got dire. And then as somebody who is in recovery, it kind of got to the same point. It was like, really, I mean, I guess this is just kind of going back to our perspective on things, and that's how recovery has changed me. Is like, I get to do things instead of I have to do things. And I know that's something that we talk about all the time in meetings as well. But things that used to become chores because of my own mental conditioning, where even things that I loved became chores because I'm just over it, or because it's not what I want to do, because everything is self-driven, became opportunities. It's like we were watching a movie here the other day, and a quote stuck with me that this lady said, "Anything can happen, anything happens all the time." And she was talking to somebody who was having a really hard day. And it just really hit me, like, that's 100%. I can either wake up and go, everything is a chore, or I can go, anything can happen today. Anything happens all the time.
Yeah.
And it's really, I mean, what I guess, through our conversations and communication with other people in the program, or just being able to be in connection instead of sitting up here with things, is that it's 100% down to, I mean, I can get up today and go to the liquor store, or I can get up and look for a better way of life. And just like anything else, if I go in one direction over time, because I've seen that the other direction didn't work, then I'm going to slowly but surely see my life change. But there's still the pangs of being driven by self. And so it's like a matter
of but I think the biggest thing is we're able to now see that and recognize it and be like, I'm living in me right now, and I need to do something about it. And we've got all these beautiful tools that we gain as a result of doing the 12 steps, as a result of having sponsors, as a result of having friends that model what life can be like, that we don't need to stay in self. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice, right? So it's like, and I love that saying too, because it's totally true. And I'm the same as you. Like, I can really get up in the morning and be like, oh my God, I have to do all these things, and my heart gets fucking like shrunk. Or I can be like, I'm awake, I'm alive, I'm in recovery, and I have the chance to do all these things today. I want to do these things, and I want to see life in a different way, rather than the scared small way in which my life became so small when I was using. But now it's just endless, and it's just so exciting, and I have nothing to be afraid of, because I'm looked after. Ultimately, I've done all the things, and I continue to do the things every day to maintain my recovery and maintain my safety, and remain in a space where I'm connected. And that's going back to, I can't, but we can. That for me is like, that's it. Connection. I just need to connect with someone. And I'm lucky, my partner's in recovery. We talk about these things, and there's always someone I can like just connect with and be like, can you just check my head on this? Because something's a bit squiffy, or, and I often think my higher power speaks to me through other people. I often think that when I'm asking for help, when I ask for help, that's when the big change happens.
That's such a good way of putting it. Everything gets so small, and it's just, you're in, it's just tunnel vision.
Totally.
Except there is no light at the end. It's just more darkness.
Literally so fucking dark. Yeah, absolutely. I just genuinely thought that my life was never going to change. It was always going to be the same. But who would have thought? Even I was just going to say,
as a person in recovery, it's really like the beauty of being able to, like you said, recognize those impulses when we're in the right direction, but we're getting twisted up, whether it's fear, resentment, or whatever. The ability to see it and go, okay, I'm stepping out of this for a minute. I'm going to go deliver some flowers for the neighbor, or check the mail, or whatever. I'm going to do something that needs to be done, or make coffee, or whatever. I mean, like those little things, again, that I couldn't see or I couldn't comprehend would actually do anything in my life. The things are going to get me past the impulse of the highs and lows that we were talking about. And so I'm not thinking about using anymore. And at the end of the day, I'm going to feel better about having done those things than sitting around and either stressing or contemplating using.
Yeah. And going to bed and seeing your bed made because you'd made it for yourself that morning. Yeah. That is just like one of the biggest gifts to myself, is making my bed. Get up and make your bed. It's because you realize how worthy you are of a good bed. And that is right. Like, that's self-love. Like, totally self-love and self-worth. And that for me is like life beyond my wildest dreams. Because when I first came into recovery, I genuinely didn't even think I deserved the shittiest shit on someone's shoe. I was like, I don't deserve that. Why do these people care about me? Why do they love me? And then, you know, I talk about it a lot because it's so important. Is, you know, getting my first commitment at my first meeting was making tea for people. And the first kind of genuine exchange that I felt of love was, I remembered from one week to the next how people liked their hot drinks, whether it be how someone liked their coffee or which tea someone liked, and just seeing genuinely people like light up because you've given them something before they even asked for it. That for me was like, wow, the way of life is actually possible, you know, and it's through making tea for people that it's like literally changed my life.
Yeah, it's such power in the little things. It's funny because I use this quote all the time. Anthony Hopkins says, you know, we're resilient characters. We can deal with tornadoes and hurricanes. We can deal with all the big stuff, but it's the little things that are going to eat us alive. And in recovery, it's the little things that are going to save us. We just have to stem them all together, even though we don't think they'll matter individually. And we can't see how they'll come together to benefit us, like the rising tide that lifts the boat. All these little things are going to enrich us, you know, but it's like that tug of self. It's like, wow, this thing doesn't matter. Well, it will if it's clustered together with all these other things. It's gonna change our perspective, but it's so hard to see that sometimes in early recovery.
Yeah. And that's why for me now in my recovery, you know, 13 years later, I get so much out of sponsoring people. And I never thought I'd say that, because I remember when my first sponsor, I was like, why does she keep fucking telling me to call her? Why do I have to call this person? Like, what? And then she'd call me and say, am I still sponsoring? And I'd be like, I don't know. Are you? You know, I was so resistant to it. But now I'm like, I seek so much joy in seeing my sponsees grow and change. And they are the miracle. And I genuinely believe my higher power like speaks through them all the time. And they will randomly message me when they've got, you know, something happens that they manage to live through clean. And you just think, fuck, this is why we do what we do. You know, it's like, you see like this person, like I had, you know, one of my sponsees lost one of her parents in COVID. And that was, I knew when we started working together, that was like her biggest fear, was losing this parent. And within 2 weeks, they lost their parent because this person was in a nursing home, and seeing how she has navigated that and now is able to talk about it and share that lived experience with other people. Right. You know, you just, that to me is like the greatest gifts of this world. Yeah. Like no money could buy that, but by watching someone walk through something that gives them so much pain, but with their head high and love in their heart because of recovery, you know, it's just, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's just like you know, getting coins or tags at meetings. You know, when I first showed up, I didn't want to get any of that, and I know a lot of people who are like that. Like, I don't want to draw attention to it. It's like, well, it's not for you; it's for them. Somebody else needs to see that you're getting that. Somebody else needs to see that it's possible to stay on this path for more than 30 days. You know. Yeah.
I mean, in London, we don't have, especially within the LGBT community, we do not have a lot of clean time. So I was at a meeting a few weeks ago and I collected my 13 years. And somebody, like the person asked me who gave it to me, like, how long is it? 13 years. And so many people said, oh my God, 13 years. I was like, yeah. And they were like, wow. And that's why you can't beat it if you can't see it. Mm-hmm. You really can't. You can't even imagine. You know, someone said to me afterwards, you've now achieved like queer elder status. I was like, what the fuck does that even mean? I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? That scares the shit out of me. Like, how did that happen? You know, like this scared kid from Canada, do you know what I mean? Who was like, and now it's like this other thing that's just opened up. It's, yeah, I'm still like I'm so grateful. 13 years is just amazing.
So speaking of, well, if you don't mind, let's wrap it up with this. Can you tell me the suitcase story, the Duran Duran suitcase story? Because I think it's really important since we're talking about little things and the way our behaviors change. Though with the suitcase.
Oh yeah, when I lost a suitcase.
Just because I think this is so important, these little examples. It's like that. This is something that I would have totally twisted up about. And
I would have fucking killed myself.
I was like, this is amazing. Like these little things. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing it up because it is so important. You know, like, so we played a show in New York over New Year's for the ball drop, right? So like Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve. And I got up the next morning and I was exhausted. And we were all like getting ready to leave. And I forgot a member of the wardrobe team's suitcase in my hotel. And I got to the airport and I called the tour manager. I said, fuck, I forgot the suitcase. And And she said, honey, don't worry. This is going to not be the first time. This is going to happen again. And rather than getting into fear about it, I was like, right, okay, so what solution can we find? Let's find a way to get it to the management company, to get it to the storage where it now sits, and it will be coming back to the UK in the next few weeks with other gear. You know, I was able to be able to step out of my stuff and to step out of my own embarrassment about it and really be collected and calm. And more than anything, and I'm glad you told me to tell this story, Chris, is like, I didn't put myself on a fucking cross about it. Mm-hmm. I was tired. I'd been working for like 5 days straight without sleeping properly, you know, and it was a really, like, especially that event was incredible. It was run by Homeland Security. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a fucking mental, all of these things added up. And my shitty committee did not get really loud and tell me how much of a fucking shit job I'd done. You know, I was able to keep the volume very low on them and just be like, right, this is what I need to do. These are the steps that I need to put in order to make this change happen. We found a solution, we actioned it, and I got home and I didn't fucking kill myself about it. You know, that is life beyond my wildest dreams. Totally. Whereas before I would have been like, I made a mistake. Everyone's going to find me out that I don't deserve to be here because I'm so unworthy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just the way it can just be dealt with. I mean, when we talk about highs and lows and looking for balance, to me, that's such a amazing example of balance, because if I was using, I would have wrapped it around myself and made it a big
totally.
And if I was a sober person and on the wrong day, I would have absolutely lost my mind and come undone.
Yeah.
And instead, it's just like, this can be dealt with. We're going to figure out how to deal with it. That's a miracle.
It's an absolute miracle. And also working to a tour manager who has done a lot of work on herself, and she's able to be in a position where she looks at solutions. She's solution based. That is just so, I'm so grateful to have people like that are in my professional life, to be like, okay, do you know what? This is something this is a great opportunity for us to find a solution together. Let's find a solution. You know, and having that encouragement is so important. And again, that's what I mean, like getting cheerleaders around you who are going to be like, do you know what? Because I would be the same for another person. I'd be like, do you know what? That happens. What can we do to make it different? Let's sort it out. Let's get it, you know, rather than like, yeah, as you just described, I would have just made it like a big fucking song and dance. I would have come home and like, you know, used drugs for weeks just over a fucking suitcase. But, you know, that's just not even the case. It's come to the point where I've even forgotten about it, because I was just like, oh yeah, I did that. And it's like, it's done and it's sorted, you know, and it just feels so much more manageable and grown the fuck up, you know?
And as somebody who was in the meeting, hearing you talk about it, it sticks with the right people. Yeah. Because I needed to hear that at that moment. And it has stuck with me going, it just, you know, this is the behavior that I'm capable of today. I'm able to take care of myself and other people, and love myself, and understand that I make mistakes. And so I don't have to put up a giant front when I do. And I don't have to whip myself either, you know? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's the gift, isn't it? It's one of the many gifts, but I'm so glad you told me to tell that. It asked me to tell that story.
Thank you so much for taking the time for this.
Oh my God, it's such a pleasure. It's been great. I mean, I hope that somebody heard something that they related to in that. And if they didn't, there's so many other people that are in recovery too, that you can listen to.
We'll post some like XA recovery speakers and everything too. It's important to hear all the perspectives.
Totally. And as you say, it's so important that people who are in the industry put their hand up and say, I'm in recovery and you can do this. You can do this in recovery. You know, I've got 2 sponsees who work in the industry, and we, you know, and I know that they appreciate that I can understand what it's like, because it is fucking crazy. It's crazy, but you can do it. You can do it. You can be here, and you can be in recovery, and you can love yourself here.